wish a very, very warm welcome, perhaps exceptionally warm in some parts of the world where you're all tuning in from, to this session of Gems from the Wisdom Tradition, in which we are taking up the topic of casting no blame. And I'd like to remind all of us that this is described as a conversation circle. And that means that we really warmly invite all of you to participate, lending to us your wisdom, your life experience. To begin us in our journey today and looking into this topic of casting no blame, I'd like to introduce Katharine Harts. Katharine Harts has fairly recently come to Still and Moving Center as one of our instructors from California, where she was a pastor for many years. And as a Christian pastor, she is, of course, a great follower of the teachings of Christ. And yet, I always get the sense from Katharine of someone who is extremely open-hearted and open-minded, not a person of exclusiveness whatsoever, nor a person who casts blame. She has what she calls a Center for Embodied Spirituality, and she shows her independence as a pastor in the fact that many of her church services were featured people dancing through the aisles, and they were places and times of great joy. It does my heart good to think of that. So without further ado, let me hand you to Katharine Harts for casting no blame.
Thank you, Renee. And thank you for your warm welcome when I moved here just a year ago, 1st of July of last year, after 20 years of serving as a pastor. And I really wanted to just be teaching more embodied things like melt and aerial dance and aerial yoga. And so you warmly welcomed me in, and Still and Moving Center has been my touch point, really, my center, my church, if you will, because I love community, and I love this community of people that gather around the Still and Moving Center. So it's my honor to be here, and I'm so glad you asked me to talk. I haven't done a talk for a year now, so I may be a little rusty, but we'll do this together. I wanted to start with how I got into being a minister and devoting my life in this direction. And it's very experiential. As a child, I had this deep yearning in me. Of course, I didn't have those words as a kid or saw that as a positive thing. I thought there was something wrong with me. I was crying often. I was very tender. And I didn't realize that that yearning would lead me places. I think of Rumi's poem, "The grief you cry out from draws you towards union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup. Listen to the moan of a dog for its master. That whining is the connection. There are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be one of those, or one of them." So in college, I went to Mexico City. I was a Spanish major, so I went to study for the summer in Mexico City. And I was raised sort of in a church. We weren't, it was more like going to the country club every week, or actually we didn't go that often because my parents loved to camp. So a lot of my formation around experience of God was in creation. And but I went to Mexico City, and I was overwhelmed with the largeness of Mexico City and the culture. And we went to the hill where many of the pilgrims crawl on their knees to La Virgen de Guadalupe. And I was up on the hill, and I was like so angry at the church for here are these peasants crawling to this gold laden church, and I started ranting. But then I watched this one woman, this one peasant, and she was on her knees, and many of them have been on their knees for 5 or 6 miles, kind of making a bargain with God, like heal my daughter and I'll crawl to La Virgen de Guadalupe. And she had this rag for her knees to soften the blow, and she would throw the rag up on the next step, and she was holding the rosary in her other hand, and she'd place her knee on that rag and then look up, and she was saying the rosary, so you could see her mouth was moving. And she'd set her knee down, and then she would do it again with the other leg. As I watched her, and that motion of her heart, just her heart was leading her up the stairs, I thought to myself, I want that. I want that kind of devotion. And I was holding these two things of being so angry at the church, and yet I wanted that kind of devotion that I saw her have. So I did one of those quick prayers, oh God, if you're really there, let me feel you. I want to feel it if you are there. And I felt the unconditional love of God in every cell of my being. And for the next 2 months, I was in ecstasy. I saw the vibration of nature and the oneness. I felt the oneness. My heart was broken open. I walked around in ecstasy. And during that time, I started at night in the dark, alone in my room, being moved. I hadn't been a dancer before. And I was being moved rather than I was willing move or muscularly doing it. So I later learned that what I was doing was sacred dance. So I went to the Sacred Dance Festival about 4 years later. I found the Sacred Dance Guild and went to it. It happened to be at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. And I went to it and found like-minded people and had a wonderful time and decided I wouldn't leave. And they said, well, you know, every week isn't like Sacred Dance Guild week here at the seminary. You have to apply. And I said, don't worry. I'm here. I'm not leaving. And so, of course, I applied and got in and went to seminary there at Pacific School of Religion in the Graduate Theological Union. And from there, I went to study with Matthew Fox, Creation-Centered Spirituality. I had become interested in the Christian mystics. They spoke the deepest to my soul, and so I studied with Matthew Fox and Creation-Centered Spirituality and the mystics. And I was so lucky while I was there. There was a Sufi who was translating Jesus' prayer, the Lord's Prayer, into Aramaic. He was translating the Beatitudes. His name's Neil Douglas Klotz, and I started working with him and learned the Aramaic prayer of Jesus. And that prayer has been with me all these years. So I know when we hear Christianity, there's a lot of noise from the shallow end of the pool of Christianity. But I've really found and discovered that there's a lot of depth and practices. I used to complain there aren't any practices in Christianity, but once I started studying the mystics, I realized there was. So contemplative prayer, centering prayer has been my go-to, and Lectio Divina has been my go-to. So Cynthia Bourgeault, in her book called The Wisdom Jesus, said, meditation is the tool for us to upgrade our operating system, to move from that either or binary system to a more spacious heart awareness that sustains the wisdom way of knowing. So when contemplating this topic, beyond blame or casting no blame, I started with the mystics, but the mystics kept pointing back to Jesus and the wisdom Jesus. And so I'm going to start with the model that Jesus laid for us of casting no blame. So what did Jesus actually teach? Oh my gosh, this has been many years of peeling away all this stuff on top of Jesus, all the layering from the Western Christianity that we've been handed to get to the historical Jesus and to the heart of what Jesus taught. I think what I've come to through the work of many scholars like Cynthia Bourgeault and Richard Rohr, that Jesus was seen as the wisdom teacher. Sophia, which is a Greek for wisdom, that female persona in a male body, that Jesus was a wisdom teacher. First of all, Jesus didn't come here to create a religion called Christianity. When Jesus was asked, what did he come here for? He came here to bring life and to bring it abundantly. And how do we live an abundant life? He said, unless a seed dies in the ground, unless that seed dies, you can't go any further. So the point was, Jesus laid out a plan of transformation. In fact, his whole life, if you look at it as a template of the transformative path. So this is far different path than the trappings of Christianity, this path of dying to self, dying to the false self. There's a purpose and a direction for our letting go. Jesus said, those who lose their life will find it, and those who keep it will lose it. And through my studies at the GTU, I discovered that what was added into that phrase was those who lose their life for my sake and the sake of the gospel will find it. So, you know, that little italics word, I mean, most biblical scholars believe that was an add-on, really shifted the ballpark from Jesus being transformation of consciousness into a set of martyrdom and sacrificial actions, which you can perform still with your egoic system, right? You haven't changed your operating system with that. Another thing that I see that Jesus clearly did over and over was to widen the circle, to include more and more people, to move it from a tribal religion to include the marginalized. He said when he went back to his hometown of Nazareth, he was brought up to read, he read, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because God has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. God has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord." So that's where I think Jesus, as that Middle Eastern mystic, has a lot to offer us when we talk about casting no blame. Another gem that I think is in our tradition is Mary Magdalene. And I don't mean that I think Mary Magdalene's important because maybe they were married. That's irrelevant to me. But what I know from reading the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and just from other historical works is that she really grasped the teaching of Jesus, and she really grasped that it was a transformational path. And we know enough from just the canonical text of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that she was, she's somebody who showed up even in the pain, even in the terrible times. She was there at the cross. She was there at the foot of the cross. She was there at the tomb. And then when Jesus came from the tomb, he appointed her as apostle to the apostles. But there's another reason I think Mary Magdalene and Jesus's relationship is so important to Christianity and would help really redeem some of the troubles that Christianity is in from its Western overlay, is that here is an example of a man and a woman working together in spiritual partnership, a discipleship of equals, a relational health, and a Christianity whose touchstone is more about compassion and wisdom rather than judgment, guilt, blame, and shame. So to restore Mary Magdalene in the heart of the story is also to restore Christianity, because until you can find a way to put her in the picture, I think the picture of Christianity is a little askewed. So the ultimate no blame for Jesus, of course, came when he was crucified. He was on the cross and said, "Father," or Daddy, Abba, "forgive them, they know not what they do." It's important to look at what is happening in those 3 days with Jesus in the tomb. Or you could say it another way, Jesus descending into the heart of the earth. Perhaps, just perhaps, Jesus, or the Christ consciousness, is going into the center of creation to permeate everything with love. So Jesus took the more difficult path to know that the depths of suffering and sin, and yet to forgive reality for being what it is. That is the third way, beyond fight and flight, and yet in a subtle sense, including both of them, because only the Spirit can lead us into the paradox of the death and resurrection, the pattern of all growth and all change and all transformation. It's equally hard to trust both sides of that, dying to ourselves and also the promise of a new state, of that transformation. So perhaps Jesus is holding those oppositions, those polarities in love, somehow to sit with the condition of this earth plane and not to judge them as being wrong or sinful, which is to ultimately to accept the conditions and not go into finger pointing. Then you begin to get a picture of what Jesus is doing in the tomb, being buried in the earth where the conditions of gravity and limited time are experienced. Have Jesus experience these conditions and not judge or condemn them, so that the opposites can be met. This is the ultimate, I think, of casting no blame. In the gospel it says, "For God so loved the world that he sent his son." Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear that, I hear the overlay of just a weird transaction, if you will, that God had to have his own son murdered for our sins. I think that kind of view, Christ died for our sins, and I think it's been overemphasized, let's just say that, in Western Christianity. I think what hasn't been emphasized is that God is reaching towards us, not because we are sinful, but because our hearts are broken. Now that brings me back to Mary Magdalene. So Mary Magdalene as a model of how staying present to God's love even when there's times of darkness. We know that her heart was broken. Her heart was broken as she sat at the tomb. And we know that she showed up, not in a passive way, but as a way of staying connected with her beloved as he went into the heart of the earth. So I don't see Mary just sitting at the tomb passively. I think she's maintaining their love connection, and she's supporting him in what he's doing. She's pouring her heart out, her love. She's keeping the connection with him on the soul plane. She's dying before she dies. She's ditching the sentimental story. She's ditching the victim story, and she's trusting the God of many names. She takes the anguish into her own heart, his anguish, so that he may travel freely to accomplish the cosmic task he has been given to do. He must travel to the heart of the earth to take on substituted love. She's also working on letting go of the human form of Jesus she once knew and held and loved. Passion surrenders to another love that is not here or there, but rides the breath of a greater mystery. So her passion surrenders not to emptiness, but to non-localized, not here or there, of their love relationship between the realms. I think many of us have felt this when we've had someone pass into the light, and we struggle with that they aren't here any longer, but then we step into a greater expansion with our love relationship with them, a greater dimension. This greater mystery confounds our minds and our bodies. Simultaneously, one thing is so dead and no more, and yet there is some kind of movement, some kind of life, rather than looking for an object that is not there anymore. Mary is allowing the yearning for that love relationship to transform her. In other words, she's being a good steward to the pain and allowing that pain to transform her. John Donne wrote when he was leaving his wife to go for travels. He said, "Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat." So when Mary is at the tomb, and the tomb is rolled away, and she can't find him, and she's distraught, and there's a gardener there, and the gardener says to her, "Mary," in such a way that she recognizes that it's Jesus. Not the human Jesus she knew, but the cosmic consciousness, Christ consciousness. What that reflects is her own transformation, her own transformed consciousness, one that can see now, can see her beloved. It's not something that happens only in the outer world, but it is transformation of the heart that has been through fire. It is the prejudice of our modern thought that events happen only in the outer world. When Mary sees him from gardener to risen one, Rabboni, she has the eyes to see and a transformed heart. When I think of this, I think of the alchemy of their love. Jesus and Mary Magdalene have modeled that the capacity to have your heart broken without going into bitterness is transformative. Jesus said, "Unless a seed dies, it remains only a seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds and seedlings of little love, which then can grow into greater love." So Jesus says that is a fundamental truth, that in dying, we become alive. There's a poem by a friend of mine, Kim Rosen, who wrote, "And in impossible darkness, in impossible darkness, do you know how the caterpillar turns? Do you remember what happens inside a cocoon? You liquefy. There in the thick black of your self-spun womb, void as the moon before waxing, you melt. You melt as Christ did for 3 days in the tomb, conceiving in impossible darkness the sheer inevitability of wings. Conceiving in impossible darkness the sheer inevitability of wings." This is all such a paradox, a mystery. None of us crosses over by our own effort or merits or purity or perfection. We are all carried by an uncreated and unearned grace. But the sticking point for some is that this grace is for everyone, everyone. The unconditional love is the same for the Pope or the criminal. Worthiness is never the ticket, only the deep yearning. As the ticket is given in the longing, the tomb is always finally empty. There are no exceptions to death, and there are no exceptions to grace. I think of Rumi again, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. There is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make sense. So that's all I have for my presentation part of it. I have some discussion starters if we want them or need them. But there you have it. So I guess we open it up for conversation. We have a half an hour, right?
Okay. Indeed. Thank you so much, Katharine. I'm not sure that I have ever considered this topic of casting no blame in the hugely transformational way that you have described it. And somehow, in leaving behind all sense of victimhood, we leave behind our entire smaller self and are somehow able to rise to this much loftier state of being, of grace, of who we are connected with the all. Very beautifully presented. I thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You know, blame, I mean, I understand blame. I mean, before I could even talk about this, I wrote pages and pages just of blame that I have, a kind of a grievance story, right? I had to like get it all out. But what happens is it shortchanges, right? It shortchanges our own, well, it helps us escape from our own pain, right? Rather than like let pain and have its way with us, right? So a lot of times we want to blame because we want to escape our pain. Yeah, it's a longer process, right? To let our pain go in towards transformation. It's easier to blame somebody. I had this story I was going to share about this fisherman coming in to after a day of fishing, and he comes in and there's like this narrow passageway, and he sees this boat coming, and he's like waving, "Stop, stop, stop, you're gonna hit me, you fool." He starts cussing and yelling at and the motorboat crashes into his fishing boat. and he's in the water and he's still screaming. And he realizes that there's no one piloting the boat. There was no one to blame, so now he's really angry. And I think we do live in a blame culture. I mean, I think we live in blame and shame, which the trouble with blame is that it doesn't lead towards compassion. It doesn't build understanding. And it objectifies the other person rather than, you know, forgiveness is central to Christianity. It wasn't peripheral. It's central. And I think of the Amish. I always think of the Amish who practice forgiveness, and they start their day knowing there's going to be someone they're going to need to forgive. And we had that stark example of that when I think his name was Charles Roberts, came and shot 10 school children. And that very same day, the Amish walked over to the parents' house of Charles Roberts and offered compassion. And when it was Charles Roberts' memorial, the Amish outnumbered the other people who were there. So that builds relationship. And in a way, staying in relationship actually builds accountability too. I mean, you know, Desmond Tutu and is a pure example of what happened in South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation Project, where they were sitting and listening to the victims' pain. Those who the perpetrators had to sit and listen to hours and hours of the pain. So that didn't I mean, you know, forgiveness is a process. But the goal is to stay in relationship and not objectify the person.
Let's see if some others want to chime in. You've raised so many questions and comments that people just want to spontaneously offer them. And if we need your little prodding along the way,
okay,
go ahead and do that. Looks like Lani has something she'd like to
say.
I'm
all ears.
You know, it's definitely something I strive for and fall short of multiple times. Forgiveness of others and forgiveness of myself. And I'm doing better in terms of not casting blame, but it's really challenging at a time where other people's actions could so detrimentally affect the health of my child, who, you know, my son experienced a seizure last year, so his health, he's doing very well. He hasn't had a seizure since, but we've been in strict quarantine because we're very mindful that he could be impacted adversely by this virus. And so an example of of having a very difficult time not casting blame, seeing friends ignore scientific advice and evidence and choose to willfully disobey the law. It's been really, really challenging for me not to get angry, and what I've had to do is not confront, but rather take a step back. And sometimes if it's on my social media, I have to hide their feed because it upsets me so much. It upsets me so much. And rather than say something I'll regret or do something I'll regret, I'd rather just hide their feed and maintain the friendship. So I don't know. I mean, that's just an example of having a challenging time with it.
Yes, I was really hoping we would get some suggestions, some practical everyday life suggestions on not casting blame, and to go actually beyond that, as Katharine so beautifully pointed to as a possibility.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a solution, but for me, the solution has been not to engage, which is very unlike me, Renee. I am a rebellious, strong-minded activist, as you know, so it's very unlike me not to engage with particular people, but I love them and I don't want to hate them. I love these people. We just have different opinions about how to conduct ourselves.
Perfect. Thank you. How do each of you avoid this very common practice of blaming when something happens to us, rather than taking any sort of personal responsibility, or rather than just chalking it up to a driver without a boat? There is no one to blame. Or a boat without a driver. Let me put that the right way. Diana.
I think for me, it's being able to acknowledge my anger and my upsetness and my blaming, and to be able to not stuff it, but to be able to acknowledge it, that that's how I feel and that I'm angry. And part of what I do is I trust we all are one, and that it's in meditation and in trusting it's for the highest good. But I don't want to stuff what I feel. There's times that I don't speak up because friends feel differently and I love them. And there's times that I will speak up if I feel so called that that's what I need to do. It's really hard, especially with everything that's happening, not to get caught in the anger and the fear and the blame. And for me, I want to put out more love and faith and trust in what's happening. I want to be aware and I want to be able to hear what's going on, but I also feel like this is where I need to bring it to my silence and come into my heart. And but I will speak up when it feels I can. And yet there's other people I don't, because we are friends and they see things differently and it doesn't do any good. But I think it's the most important thing for me is to acknowledge it, so that I don't project it out, my fear, my anger, my blame. If I don't acknowledge it and don't own it, then I will project it out, and I want to make sure I don't. And I want to take it into my silence, into my meditation and prayer, that it's for the highest good, and then keep that love and compassion in my heart.
Thank you so much. And so when you come out of that silence and you decide that, yes, I'm not blaming this person, and yet I am going to speak up, can you say what it is that makes the difference between holding back and deciding to speak?
I think for me, when I speak up, I try to speak from my own truth, acknowledging this is my truth, and I understand that we have different ways of seeing things and understanding things. And yet there's sometimes I need to speak up, and sometimes I do hide them, or I don't want to follow them because I just don't want to see all that in my newsfeed, or I don't want to see that on television. I limit the amount of time I watch television for, or I play games to separate myself from it. But I think it is really being aware of what I'm feeling, and then when I speak, to try to come from my messages and from a place of love, and just stating my feeling without saying that you're crazy and I don't agree with you whatsoever. Even though I'm saying that, but I'm saying it because I'm sharing my experience without trying to blame them, but to really share who I am and what's important to me.
Maurice, I've hardly ever heard you blame another human being. I wonder how that could be. How do you manage that?
So I do a lot of it in private, so I don't really want to do it in front of other people usually. But my experience on Southern California freeways, for example, when someone does something untold toward me at first, I immediately try to ask myself, haven't I done that to someone else? That is a lot of maybe what I've been aggrieved. I could see that element still in myself, even though I may not express it that much. And so I have to, it's not so much that I cut the other people slack, but I try to just see all of us as having the same essence and having also the same foibles. And we're all working on it. And then after that, if need be, I try to ask myself, where does my duty lie? You know, it gets into, am I my brother's keeper and all that kind of stuff. But where does my duty lie? Including maybe, let's say there's an accident and I do have to go to court and testify, which has rarely happened. But I would do it if I thought that that's where the duty was. Not whether I liked it or disliked it. It's not about personality. It's about something about where does duty lie, especially about education and how to educate all the people involved about the situation. So in short, if I have my right mind eventually, then I try to bring it back to myself and I say, hey, I've got that in me too.
It sounds as if you ask yourself, who am I to cast stones?
Yeah.
Yeah, not as elegantly, but yes.
It sounds like layers of expansion.
Talk to us about that, Fariba.
Well, it looked like Maurice goes very, in a nice structural way, figure out how to expand the situation or explain the situation to himself. As Katharine was talking, I was thinking about who has tendency to blame. And I can feel there is a helplessness when we blame other people. We feel really helpless to change the situation. Whereas Katharine gave us a lot of ways to think about it and reach out and be accountable when something goes wrong and proactive to resolve it. I personally went through many years ago, almost 20 years ago, through a very, very difficult passage of life. And I went to the beach here in Santa Barbara to walk. And it was 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was really, really my chest was so closed down. And I saw in the fog, somebody is walking toward me. And I believe it was Jesus, because he told me, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing. And it was an immediate drop of all the energies that I had relating to the situation. They just evaporated because it was a new view offered to me that I was familiar with. And also the message that I am asked to come out of the pettiness and why this happened, to layers that as we don't know, we hurt each other. And it's not necessarily vicious or aimed to hurt other person. People become selfish. So in the wisdom path, that alone is not good, but you have to be able to bypass your ego, where the expansion is. But I think even looking at what Jesus left behind for us 2,000 years ago, just not assume that people, when they hurt us personally, but there's a certain amount of steps, inner steps within themselves, that we could or could not be responsible for it. I think that expands the whole situation. Anything that does that help us to have a learning steps and just being able to relate, because we're fragile beings. We do clash with each other.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for those of you who shared. This is giving me a lot to think about. I've been sitting here with thinking through different scenarios in my own life, you know, where I've dealt with this, and what has brought release for myself from blaming. And I think, first of all, when someone directly does something that harms me, or that I see more often that I see as harming others. So like someone mentioned earlier about, you know, choices people are making during the pandemic. I ask myself, is this something I can let go of? And if I can, I do. Is this, if I can't let go of it, is this something that I need to say something about? And with that is, you know, what is my role, right? Which was mentioned before too. And then if neither of those work, then there's inner work that I have to do, right? And I don't really know how to explain it other than that I open myself up. I ask for help. I open myself up and ask for source, the divine, whatever, to help me to move beyond that place. The other thing I was thinking was, oh yeah, the other piece is, oh my gosh, and driving is like, and I used to live in Los Angeles, driving is like the most unredeemed part of myself. Like, it, man, if it's gonna come out, it comes out there. And what has helped me most recently as I'm encountering people just in the world is I want to work from the assumption that that person is doing the very best that they can in that particular moment in time. Just like I'm trying to do the best I can at any given moment in time. Very often just that shift releases me from that position as judge. If I'm being super aware, I'll ask myself, why do you feel like you need to judge that person for that action? And is often pretty revelatory. But that posture of always assuming the best of other people is something I do not live into as often as I would like. And so it's helpful for me simply to call myself back to that.
Very helpful. Sheila.
This is such an appropriate topic because these challenging times, and I think about how if I judge other people, uh, it's interesting how I've noticed numerous times where someone has been brought into my life, and it's almost like a mirror to reflect my own inadequacies and show me, you know, what's happening with myself that I need to resolve. And it isn't the other person. It's really something that I need to resolve within myself and my view of them in order to move forward. So,
Can you give an example, perhaps?
oh, just when someone makes an accusatory statement, or um, and rather than going on the defensive, it's difficult to not go on the defensive, but try to think, what is this trying to teach me? What am I supposed to learn from this experience? Yeah, just thinking of synchronicity and times that people have been brought into my life, and it may not be for long. It could just be for a short season, and then looking back afterwards and thinking why that person was there and what I learned from that person being in my life.
It sounds as if you have gone actually then from a state of blame to a state of appreciation for that other human being.
Well, and that also helps with forgiveness of ourselves, because, you know, if we're holding these things in our own hearts and we can't let them go, then, you know, it's going to affect us and how we interact with others.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Krista, you've been listening in so intently. Do you have a comment you'd like to make?
Oh, I'm really just enjoying listening. There's points of resonance with things I've been reading. I'm reading a book about shadow psychology called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers from the 90s. I think it's like a classic shadow psychology. And it talks about a lot of these same issues. How someone we want to blame is showing us something about ourselves because we are one. And then I'm thinking about the bigger context of colonialism, climate change, and how each of us carry and participate in contributing to climate change, ways that, you know, as Western culture has, you know, dominated and harmed and colonized and, you know, all those big things. I work in that a lot to just own it. It's hard work, so that's why I'm just listening. That was a little glimmer of my mind. Thank you so much, Katharine. That was really beautiful.
Mary, with the name that you have, would you like to weigh in?
Thank you, Katharine. That was a wonderful sharing. When I think of Jesus and forgiveness, I think of the passage where he who is without blame, you know, or without sin, cast the first stone. And then I think of Mother Teresa, because she was such an incredible individual, but she had her detractors, and she said, whatever you do, do it with love. And then in my own personal experience, and it's been a journey. I mean, in my 20s, I was very opinionated and I was very mouthy, and having children, getting married, having children, there were times when Malia would actually be my conscience, and she'd say, Mom, your face, you look so angry. And it startled me, and I'd have to think, oh gosh, what set me off? What happened that I could do that? And through the years, I mean, I'm going to be 70 this year, and I try to, you know, when I find myself losing my patience, losing my temper, to think about the other person, because I don't know where they came from. I don't know what pains they've been through, what life experiences they've had, what made them into the individual that they are now. And I just try to pray for them, and I pray for myself a lot because I'm still a work in progress. I can see my own faults, and a lot of it is hidden. I try again, not like you've shared. We get these things in our minds, and hopefully it doesn't come out our mouth. And so it's, you know, it's been a journey. I'm grateful to have spiritual directors who they never judge. They just will listen to what I have to say, and then maybe take it in, you know, have you thought about it in this context? Or what do you think might have happened that made you think that way? So it's wonderful when I hear the different contributions that they're aware of help. They're aware of books, organizations that can help. I think of some of these people who just stay at home and they're just negative, and you can't reach them all, but you can pray for them all. Amen.
Amen.
You know, we're reaching the top of our hour, and what I wanted to do is see whether I could first ask Katharine to give any last things that she might like to say, having listened in on this conversation that we've had since her beautiful presentation, and then perhaps ask Fariba Entashari if she might say a couple closing words for us.
I love hearing everybody's angles. And I mean, this is gnarly, right? We kind of have to wrestle with this. And Maurice, you saying about, and you too, Mary, let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to cast the stone. And everyone slowly dissipated. Jesus had a way of leveling the playing field there, which I thought was really brilliant. And then he said to the woman, go and sin no more. To me, that's a great example of holding accountability and reminding us all where we stand. We stand in need of forgiveness. We stand in need of understanding of each other and compassion. So I loved what everybody said. I think that the point about not spiritually bypassing our emotions is really important, and finding a safe way to do that. When I started with this topic, I wrote literally pages of people I blame, situations I blame. It was a rant, and I think it was good. I think it was good. It freed me up to go on. So I think not spiritually bypassing our feelings about certain things, but also us offering those as a gift as well. I offer these up to you, God, to transform and shed new light on. So the path of transformation is gnarly, right? I love the Aramaic prayer, the translation of it, done by Neil Douglas Klotz, and the line about, it says, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Loosen the bonds of mistakes that bind us as we release the strands we hold of others' guilt. And to me, that opens up that, and just instead of saying, forgive me, or forgive us, it's this relationship of the strands we hold of others' guilt and the bonds of mistakes that have us, and asking for that to be loosened. So, Washboklan Habain Wakdahain, Akanadaf Kanan, Shawak Lahayabain. So, it's great to talk about these things. I mean, I think our pandemic allows us all to be a little bit more mystics, right? We have the time and space, and we're enclosed to be able to allow God's transformative love to work in us.
To bring together what we learned last week and what we received this week is really, really, it's important in the world that everything is getting a little bit more complicated in news, and the life that we live in is to remember the wisdom of influence that we can have in area we can have influence and change, and also have the wisdom to accept things that are way beyond our reach. I love what was mentioned about the prayers. We cannot reach everyone, but we can hold everyone in each other's love. Thank you. Thank you, Katharine.
Thank you all so much. Thank you so much to
Thank you.
Ariba, who will be giving one of our future presentations, and certainly to Katharine for the rich presentation that you shared with us, just so from the heart and from life experience. Really.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for your presence, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Namaste.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Yes, aloha, mahalo.
Aloha, mahalo.
Wonderful meeting.
Bye, everyone.